Hello, women of Atlas. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be here with you right now. I love, especially that because of where all are gathered, I can visualize. I can visualize everything. I can visualize the floor. I can visualize the space. I can hear the sounds. I can visualize so many people who I love amongst your faces. So thank you so much for including me. I wanted to give special thanks to the Rural Women of America, the Bowman, North Dakota branch. What magic you've created. When I heard that this event, when I heard about this event and that it was the women who had created this, I thought to myself, of course it's the women. That's what we do. We come together and we take care of each other. And I thought of, that saying that if the three wise men had been the three wise women, they would have asked for directions, arrived on time, and brought a casserole. So here we are with, we asked for directions, we arrived on time, and I know we have casseroles here. And so thank you so much. And I also wanted to really thank Carrie Fry for reaching out and connecting and including my mom and me in this event. And I want to introduce my mom, who is standing there. Mom, if you could wave, that would be great, so everybody can meet my mom, Joan Wink. And I'm Dawn Wink. Many of you, especially around the ranch, kind of know me as Joan and Dean's girl, and I respond to that. I answer to that. So if you see me or we see each other, then that will be, I will know exactly who you're talking about. But I'm Dawn, and I am so grateful to be here. I am so sorry that I can be here only in spirit right now and not in person. A dear friend got married last night on Valentine's Day in Santa Fe, and it was a tiny wedding, and I had already said that we would go when I found out about the day this was, and so I apologize that I am not there in person. I am absolutely there in spirit right at this very moment, and I knew it would be cold, and so I built a fire for us for our time together, and gosh, what an event! What an event brought us together, and I so honor the extraordinary spirit and generosity of women to come together at a time like this, and I am so deeply grateful to be involved. When Carrie and I talked about what about this and what I might talk about, a couple of things came up, and one was a novel that I wrote. Called Meadowlark, and and women's connection with the land, and both of those are so intertwined here. And so I'll talk a little bit about about Meadowlark and the story behind it. Meadowlark is very roughly based on my great grandma Grace, and I grew up hearing stories about my great grandmother Grace, like we all did. It's kind of a fabric of who we are as women. You hear these stories about your grandmother or about relatives, and they become who you are. And so I grew up hearing these stories, and very much just they became wove them into kind of the fabric of who I am. And then I became an adult, and I vividly remember the moment when, because it was when the kids were little, and so we had this mountain of laundry on the bed, and Mom and I were folding the clothes that went with 3 toddlers, and all of a sudden I was thinking about Grandma Grace, and we were on the ranch and in the ranch house, and so all of a sudden I was thinking about those stories, and all of a sudden I went, wait a minute, and so I asked Mom a question, which I won't share right now because I don't want to ruin, in case you haven't read Meadowlark, but if you pop me an email, I will tell you the question. And all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute. So I asked Mom this question, and she was holding up this little tiny shirt, and she kind of stopped, and she said, I don't know, but I've always wondered, and she kind of smiled. And so I wrote a book to find out. I took a couple of stories that I know happened with my great grandmother Grace, and wove throughout tons of, and then I read every book I could find from the homesteading era. And, you know, mostly what I wanted to read women's stories. I wanted to read letters that they had written. I wanted to read their journals, because I knew these stories. What I didn't know was really the details of what it was like to be a woman on the prairie at the turn of the century. And so I read and read and listened and read, and during all of this time, I walked the land through different seasons with, you know, kids strapped all over the place often, sometimes by myself, and I really listened to the land. And where it very much started out as Grace's story, what became very clear to me very quickly was that the land and Grace could not be separated, that they were very much woven together. And it's been my experience that as women, the land, there is a connection. There is a deep connection. And the land ended up being a primary character, a primary reflection of Grace's spirit and her of the land spirit throughout the book. And so I'll just read the author's note, and this is how it begins. Author's note: I found this journal spanning 1911 to 1930 hidden in my great-grandmother Grace's ranch house nearly 20 years after her death. A faded blue hair ribbon was tied around it. A scrap of pink paper held between the cover and first page of the journal fluttered to the floor the first time I opened the book. On it was written in Grace's handwriting, "There was but one way to heaven for me, and the path went straight through hell." 2 dried prairie roses fell intertwined from the last page. And so Grace's story begins. And as I said, and the land becomes such an integral part of sharing her story. And Grace in the book writes in her journal, and this is what she writes about the prairie. One evening: the beauty, the bitterness, not a land of mediocrity, but of stunning beauty and brute force. Any living thing that can't survive and appreciate both will find little to love or live for on the plains. And boy, did we get dealt the brute force end of that. And after such a gorgeous summer, I mean, when I read that now, it's with, you know, I wrote that obviously before the Atlas storm, and I read that now, and it becomes even more poignant and stronger and gut-wrenching. And so the brute force of it. And then Grace goes on and she starts to look around, and she starts to notice the women's role on the land, and how the way we walk the land is unique from men's. And at one point she writes, "Women's tears," and it's during a drought, during one of those awful droughts, "women's tears brought more water to the parched earth than any of the summer thunderstorms or winter snows ever did. Women nourished these plains with tears and blood." And ever since Storm Atlas, I don't know if there's been another time that so many women's tears have fallen on the land. And that's what brings us together today in sisterhood. All of us here, no matter how one was affected, all of our lives have been transformed by this storm. And it has been a long winter. You know, that winter started on October 4th, and everybody is really feeling it right now. And Grace, when she looks out, so she looks out over the land, and this is what I want to remember as well, because she starts to, there's this brute force, and there's this bitter cold and scorching heat and droughts, and she's looking out one evening, and she's nursing her infant, and she's looking out the window. And so I'm just going to read that piece to you, and think about any time we ever either nursed an infant or held an infant with the bottle. "Beyond the window, a silver slice of sun rose in the sky. Light drenched the land in water-stained cornflower blue and drew crisp edges of contour and depth, defining the curve of knolls and vales invisible to the eye in the full light of day. Her eyes moved from the mound of her breast out to the mounds and concave indentations of the prairie. Grace saw in the prairie an evocation of the curves of a woman. She felt her body's link with the conformation and silhouette of the land. Peace settled around her like a fleecy cloud, despite the ceaseless plodding sound of the cow outside the window, who searched for vein in her calf. The low timbre of the wind rustled through the tufts of buffalo grass, and the soft, pulsing cadence of her son's breath echoed the soft, steady murmur in each swallow. And this is what I always come back to with the land and with being a woman and with the seasons of the land and with the seasons of life and with joy and with tragedies, is looking at the land and feeling that sense of kinship. And then I thought about this some more, and I thought, but man, did that land deal us a blow this time, with the storm and with the weather. And so Grace learns that this is also very much a book of women's friendship. And initially it was going to be a book pretty much exclusively about Grace. That was my thought, was to write a book about Grace. And then suddenly May, and for those of you who have read Meadowlark, you know May, because May makes herself known. And she came bounding into this book exactly like she bounds into the story. She literally, I was sitting there very quiet one day, and I was writing, and I was so focused on whatever I was doing and thinking about Grace, and literally I heard come over, it was over actually the eastern horizon, I heard this ebullient voice say, "Hello! Hello!" And I stopped and I kind of looked around. I was like, who is that? And over she flounced, literally just like the branding scene, just like she comes into this book, and she just absolutely pranced right into the story. Her voluptuous, ebullient, completely the opposite of Grace self, and much to Grace's surprise, she has a friend. And in the same way that May comes bouncing ebulliently into the story, Daisy Standing Horse slides in. I say she slips in as quiet as a shadow, because that's exactly how she came into the book. It was the same experience of, I listened as I wrote this book. I don't think I created. I think I knew stories, I listened, I read, I heard, I listened to the land, I touched my great-grandmother's coffee grinder, the well-worn knob, and I held on to it. And Daisy Standing Horse slips in with such a quiet dignity. And these three women develop a friendship that even astounds them in all of their differences, and each represent the land, each represent the prairie, each represent a spirit, a very different spirit of womanhood. And so one of the things that Daisy shares with Grace is about song. And so I'm going to read about song and song on the prairie. And this is something that I have turned to again and again and again in traumatic or painful times in my own life. And so Grace, and they're talking because people are gossiping. The women are telling stories and they're gossiping, and Grace is, and it's hurtful. And so Grace and Daisy are talking, and Grace is asking Daisy, why are they doing this? And then Grace says, "I've wondered myself why people can't just live their own lives," Grace says. "Seems to me it's the people who don't want to look at their own lives who pass the most judgment on others. Easier to put others down than to look at themselves." Grace walked over and ran fingers over the stacks of fabric in Daisy's house. "That's exactly right," said Daisy. "I would rather listen to the song of the prairie and all her animals." She walked over to look at the window. The song? Grace moved over to join Daisy, in case there was something she was missing. "I hear the wind outside blowing, sure enough." "Remember Meadowlark? and Meadowlark ties in. Every place, every creature, every person has their own song. You just have to listen for them. You have your own song, Grace, deep within you. Most people live their whole lives and never listen to the songs of life, not their own or any around them. Scares them too much. It's easier to go through life living the way everyone else expects you to. But when you're listening to your own song, Grace, you feel a deep peace right here. And she reached out and placed the flat of her palm at the center of Grace's chest. And this idea of song that Daisy and Grace talk about is something that, as I say, I've turned to again and again and again in times of real pain or tragedy. And what it is to, and we'll just take a moment right now, and I'm going to ask that we kind of hold silence, and each of us get in touch with our song. And what we'll do in just a second is we'll hold silence for a little while, and just kind of, and I invite you to close your eyes, and we will think about a time and a place or something. It can be any time, any place, that when you close your eyes and you think about it, it just brings you a feeling of deep, deep peace. And whatever that is, whether it's in childhood, whether it's now, whether it involves others, whether those others are still with us or not, whether it's something we do by ourselves, just kind of, let's just take about 30 seconds and go within and just find that feeling. And I know what my song is, even though I'd lost it for a while. And take that feeling of peace and happiness and just turn up the volume. So you take that feeling and you make it louder, not louder, I shouldn't say, stronger, stronger, and stronger. Until you can visualize yourself surrounded by this song, surrounded by this feeling of peace. And with Storm Atlas, it has really knocked. A dear friend said to me, more than cattle died in the storm. And we all know that to be true. Lives were transformed. This has had such an impact on, hopes and dreams, friendships. All of those have so much. I mean, some certain friendships have gotten strong. Other friendships have suffered because of the intense pain that people have felt. And we've lost our song. So many of us have lost our song. And it's been such a long winter. And so what I invite us to do is, whether it's now, whether it's later, is to find that song and then turn it up. And when I am feeling horrible, I remind myself, okay, where's your song? Where's your song? Because it is always deep within us. No matter what is happening in our lives, that is always deep within us. And then turn it up and make it stronger and make it stronger. And this is what we bring to the world. And I walked outside. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I walked outside yesterday actually, and it was cold, and so I went outside to get some firewood to build a fire, and I looked up, and there's a bird's nest that's right outside. Luckily, it's right outside my kitchen window, so I get to see these families of birds and the eggs that come and go. And but I looked up, and this is what I saw, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. I took a picture. This is the bird's nest right here. This is the wisteria that's now, of course, dormant for the winter. And this is this, and this is our back door. This is under the back porch. That's looking into the kitchen. But this is the bird's nest, and it's filled with snow. And I looked at it, and I just kind of had this flash, and I was thinking about the experiences from the storm. I was thinking about how long this winter has been, and I thought, man, that's what so many of us feel like. It's like we're this nest just laden with snow and waiting for spring, and just kind of hunkering down and kind of pulling inward and closing off, and just, will the spring ever come? This winter has lasted so long, and it will come. And the beauty of being together as women together is just, it's one of those, we have to hold on to that. And one, I read this as I was, after I had finished writing Meadowlark, I ran across a quote, and unfortunately I can't find who said it, but it so perfectly describes. I didn't know why I was writing Meadowlark at the time, as far as the way I'm going to describe right now, but when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly right. I wrote Meadowlark, and as I read it, this is why we're here together as women right now after that horrible storm. And this is talking about writing, but I'm just going to talk about being. Writing about or being with trauma is more than simply documenting experience. It's about illuminating life on earth. It's about transforming tragedy into art and hoping that somehow that piece of art may help someone else who's gone through something unbearable and who doesn't see that there truly is a light at the end of the dark tunnel. And by coming together today, we are transforming that tragedy, transforming that trauma into a kind of art. And it is the art of women being there for each other and moving forward and supporting one another. And the prairie has held women's tears. And, when I talk about Meadowlark and I talk about how the land always takes primacy, lest we ever forget that, whether it was 100 years ago or 4 months ago, 5 months ago, it is a part of living on the prairie, and that is why we as women need to be there for one another. And so I just, I am so with you in spirit. And I wanted to remember, after the storm, which I knew when Mom texted me, because of course there was no power, but I kept waiting to hear about it on the news, and it never appeared, so I wrote a piece. I have a blog called Dewdrops, and I wrote a piece, and it's called The Blizzard That Never Was, because I kept waiting to hear about this tragedy, and I was thinking, where is the why aren't people talking about this? Where is the coverage? And so basically, I wrote a piece to share with our family and friends what had happened on the ranch, and also what it really means for ranchers, because it's difficult often for people who live in town to really understand, and they ask usually really wildly inappropriate questions. And so I wrote about that, and I invited people to leave prayers and to leave well wishes for people affected by the blizzard. And as of today, there are almost 1,200 prayers and well wishes waiting for you there. This went around the world because of the power of what happened to you. And while nobody talked about it initially, this thing went around the world, and there are over 1,000 prayers there waiting for you. Prayers from Ireland, prayers from Africa, prayers from the UK, and so I invite you, if you just Google The Blizzard That Never Was, go and read those prayers. They were written for you. They're there for you. And so I send out such an honoring of the coming together of women today, such gratitude to be included. Anybody who wants to connect in person via email, please do pop me an email. I would love to connect. And I send huge hugs and deep gratitude. And may we move forward with song, and may we create beauty.